test, 1, 2, 3. Testing. Hello, 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 hello. Projecting. Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Doesn't sound like it's working. Test, test, test. Do what? Test, test, test.
I usually turn it sideways. This up and down is the same thing. Points very much. These same lights in all my classrooms.
Ready?
It's ready, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hopefully everyone here can hear me. My name is Michael Brown. I'm here to present a little talk on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. Hopefully, for most of you guys, this will be something new. Hopefully you can learn something from this. When I put together this talk, I kind of made the assumption that while everyone here has a technical background, information security, some of the things that deal with frameworks and controls and whatnot, you probably have not been exposed to. So I kind of assumed a lack of knowledge, in these sort of areas. They got to make sure that everyone is brought up kind of a good, decent level. So if you do know some of the things I talk about, it's not meant to be an insult. It's just meant that I'm not sure what the audience experience and knowledge is. So I want to try to cover it for everyone. For those who care, that's my email address. I have a blog at Blogspot. It's a kind of an occasional blog. Usually if I have something I want to talk about or something kind of bothers me, I'll blog about it, so it's not a real regular blog. One thing I do try to talk about is some of the upcoming events that I see in the area. I think are important. I plan to sort of blog about today's event, kind of keep my impression in terms of what I thought the event was like. Some background on myself real quickly. I come from a technical background. I know a lot of people that do work in my area, what's now called governance, risk, and compliance, too often come from an auditing or an accountant type background. I come from a very technical background. I kind of have a very varied career. I started off trying to be a software engineer, but went into system administration and then into security. One thing is that I was actually part of an IT organization that was assessed at CMM level 3. Maybe you know what that means, maybe you don't. I'll point out why that's important later on. I do have experience with a lot of different these frameworks that now become very, very popular, whether it's regulatory frameworks like a HIPAA, things like PCI, ISO 27001 and 2, and now with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, that just kind of fits in with what I've been working with. I'm also active in the committee with ISSA and some other organizations as well. This is kind of a background of what we're going to cover, kind of give you a background understanding of what we're talking about in terms of what our frameworks and what our controls and so forth. Go into the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, kind of talk about what that is, so you have a better understanding of it. I'm going to talk about some resources that you can make use of. It's gotten more and more popular, and I think it's going to increase. So a background, I actually started this whole process of creating this was actually back in February of 2013 when President Obama signed an executive order called 13636, Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. It was all about, let's create a cybersecurity framework that companies and organizations can follow to reduce cyber risks. If you're interested, you actually can get this document and take a look at it. NIST, which was the group that was to develop this, they held a bunch of workshops, as they called them, in 2013. These were workshops that brought together people from the private industry, from the public industry, to get some feedback and understanding of what they thought was important. They actually released the first version in February of 2014, which means that this framework is a little over a year old. They then had a sixth workshop in October of last year to kind of get a feedback in terms of the people who had initially started using it, what they liked, what they didn't like, and kind of laying the groundwork for possible improvements. They did release a report in December of 2014 about what they got out of this workshop. Now, one thing they talk about here, they talk about this critical infrastructure. It's like, what the heck does that mean? This is what they mean by the critical infrastructure. All these different industries, and quite honestly, most of you here are probably in some of these industries. If you're working in government, if you're working in healthcare, so forth, you probably fall into one of these critical infrastructures, which is the big push of the federal government. If you're not, if you do IT services and whatnot for companies that are in these critical services, well, you fall under information technology, but you probably might be working for companies that are in these different areas. I know for the work that we do in the company I'm with, they fall under several of these areas. NIST, if you're not familiar with NIST, it's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the part of the Department of Commerce. While their main focus, or their original focus, was standards and measurements, they've actually gotten into a lot of technology stuff, setting down technology standards. By and large, it's been the government that's been using their NIST standards, but these are available for everyone to make use of. One that you may have heard about is what's known as the NIST Special Publications 800 series. These are a series of publications, almost getting probably over 150 now, of various topics. Some are more fundamental, some are more broader. I know there's one for cloud computing. There's 2 or 3 there. There's about malware, risk assessments, and so forth. And all of them are free if you want to make use of them. You go to their website, and there they are as PDFs. You can download them. Some of them are more active in terms of updating them. There's some of them now that have gone into a 3rd or 4th revision, whereas some they wrote 15, 20 years ago and haven't updated it since. So this is the group that the government said, hey, you're going to put together the cybersecurity framework. Another thing that's kind of interesting that happened was a couple months ago, the White House had what was called the Cybersecurity Summit, or the full name is Summit on Cybersecurity and Consumer Protection, held at Stanford. Actually, if you're curious about what they covered, because they covered a lot of different topics, including cybersecurity, you can actually go to the White House website, whitehouse.gov, and you can get a report of what they talked about. And one thing that was interesting was they talked about the status of the cybersecurity framework and its use and so forth. And I've actually pulled together from different sources kind of where it's going right now. And it's kind of interesting how widely it's become put to use already. So this is some of the things just from the private industry area. You have lots of companies are already adopting the cybersecurity framework. You have Intel, you have Apple, you have Bank of America, and what a lot of the companies are also doing is not only they're adapting it for their own use, but they're telling their vendors, i.e. companies that they deal with and either get goods or services from, to say, we want you to use this as well. So it's rapidly being adapted or being put to use by a lot of different industries. Some of the ones that are kind of interesting is AIG is using it in how they write cybersecurity insurance. That's one thing I hear a lot is that people are like, oh, we had the cybersecurity issue, let's just go get insurance to cover ourselves. But what they're going to do is going to use the framework as a way to assess companies to see how good they're doing in their security, because if they're not doing too well, then they should probably be charging more for cybersecurity insurance for them. And the legal community apparently is looking at it as a way to set down a standard of care. Again, using it to take a look at companies to see, are they following good practices or not? And if they're not, then they're not doing due diligence, good care, and which means that they probably might be penalized for that. And that's just private industry. In the government side is the same thing. A lot of government agencies are now using it. DOD, DOE, Department of Homeland Security is using it. One thing is the federal government is also incentivizing its use, i.e. encouraging more people to use it. So they're doing things like we're building it into grants and such, like, oh, if you get a grant from the DOE or FEMA, they're going to say, and we want you to use this as well to assess yourself. Several state governments are using it. Those are the ones that I have seen referenced in some of these sources. And what I think is really kind of interesting is some foreign governments are looking at it. I mean, we created the cybersecurity framework for our use within the U.S., but it's funny that the UK is looking at it. The European Union is looking at it. The SEC, again, one of these things is they're looking at it as a way to tell financial organizations that are heavily regulated, you need to be following this. So depending on where you're at, you may actually be in a company or an industry where they're already starting to push it. So you need to be kind of aware of what the cybersecurity framework is, because it's probably going to come sooner or later. We've already dealing with our clients, we've had clients come up and say, like, hey, we need to be assessed against this. We need your help to look at our practices and see where we stand. Okay. But we kept calling this a framework. I mean, what is a framework? And this is a term that actually, I'll be honest, when I got into IT security, I never heard the term framework. That's something that I've only seen kind of in the last few years with some of these concepts. So I want to make sure people understand what we mean by a framework, because I think there's some misunderstandings and whatnot, and there's a lot of them, which makes it worse. Basically, it's based on an abstraction that sets down basic controls, things that you should be doing in your organization. But it's meant to be at a very high level. I saw one article that talked about the cybersecurity framework, and the person kind of complained about, oh, it wasn't detailed enough. And I'm like, it's not supposed to be detailed. That's the whole idea of a framework. It's meant to be a high level, basics of how you set things up, not getting down into a nitty gritty to tell you what you need to be doing, because then it's not a framework. It's kind of a misunderstanding about that. Again, it doesn't specify technical solutions. So a framework might say, hey, you need antivirus, but it's not going to tell you how to implement that or what's best for you. Because some people might say, well, we're going to use whitelisting and we're going to use, these different antivirus products here and there. That's great. A framework is not going to tell you that. That's what you need to understand about your needs and your organization to define that. These are some of the frameworks that are out there. Some of you might have heard about these. The one at the top is real familiar to a lot of people. It's the 27001 or 27002, which sets down what's referred to as information security management systems. This is an international standard. A lot of companies are following this. Another one is COBIT 5, which comes from ISOC. It sets down what's called IT governance. ITIL is one that people might have heard of. COSO, if you're from the financial side, you might have heard of COSO. NIST has the one of their 800s, which is more of federal control. So if you're not in the federal government, you're probably not worried about 853. Another one that probably a lot of people have heard of, I know I heard for years, is what we refer to as the SANS Top 20, which is referred to as the critical security controls. Yes?
So is this meant to encompass like all of them, similar to the cloud security matrix, where they have...
Well, kind of. You'll see, how it ties in. And it's actually kind of an interesting way how it does that. I pulled this off the internet, kind of show you what we meant by some of that as a framework. This is just kind of one where it kind of talks about the different elements you need to have and different types like scope and system model and so forth. Control is another term is you hear a lot about, and I think a lot of people don't really fully understand what a control is. I know if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have stumbled through it because I never used that term before, even though, to be honest, I've used controls my whole career. And basically, there are just specific activities performed by persons designed to ensure that business objectives are met. Basically, it's meant to be, you need to be doing this, to make sure things are being done right. And we have a lot of examples, and probably you guys have probably used a lot of these. A change management system, that's a control. Setting down a standard for a password, that's a control. These are all different controls. You probably have these where in your organization, access control and so forth. But I know for a lot of us, I always thought these are just policies, but they're actually controls. That's the funny thing, is it's a control. It can be a policy, it can be a procedure, it can be a guidance. I've had people talk to me about, what's my experience with controls, after I told them I've been writing policies and procedures for years, and I sometimes wonder, do they really understand what a control is? Because those policies are controls. Now, ideally, if you have a control, like say a password, policy that, hey, passwords must be in a certain form and so forth, you'd like to implement that control into the system, which what most of us do is we put into the system where it forces you to adhere to the standard when you create a password, and that's great to implement that control. But a control can be as simple as a written document that says, hey, passwords need to be created this way. And I created kind of an example. I said have a protection against malware. That's a control. And the thing is, this control actually exists in a lot of these frameworks. I went and pulled them up. And it's kind of funny when you look at these different frameworks, how much time they spend on it. Like the Cybersecurity Framework only has basically one statement that matches up to it, whereas with the critical security controls, they have a whole section which goes into like about a dozen sub-items all about malware. So it kind of varies in terms of how much these different controls deal with different topics. Some it's like a one-liner, hey, do this. Others will go into like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 more in-depth items, just how much they think is important. With ISO, they have a basic control, but then they go and they spend like a page or 2 of other information, kind of give you information and background, why it's important, and some advice and so forth. So it all kind of varies upon the control, upon the framework that you make use of, or your company is making use of. So on the Cybersecurity Framework, this is actually the true name of it. It's Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. It's currently version 1. It came out in February of 2014. It's meant to be voluntary. At this point, there is no government regulations that require anyone to follow it. I think that's going to be the case. Everything I seem to get an indication in terms of things I'm hearing from the government and whatnot is they really don't want to put in any regulatory requirements. So it's not going to be like a HIPAA requirement where you're required to do it and be assessed against it and so forth. They're more trying to put it out there and encourage it and doing kind of incentivize it as opposed to forcing you to use it. It's also not meant to be a one-size-fit-all. And that's a problem with people thinking of frameworks that everyone has to do the same thing. The idea is that each organization needs to take an assessment of themselves. What is important for them? What is their risk to them? To focus on what's important for them. And that's going to really difficult for a lot of people because we kind of have this mindset, everyone needs to do the exact same thing without realizing that no, every organization is a little different. The threats for different organizations are different. So some organizations need to focus in different areas and so forth. It's also meant to be a living document. They're going to be updating it based upon input and usage and so forth. So we'll see how that goes. It's a little over a year out, so we'll see how that goes. The framework is broken into 3 major parts. There's the core, there's the profiles, and there's the tiers. I think for most people we're focusing on the core because that's the kind of the heart of it. The core is broken up into 5 functions. Those are broken up into categories, and they're further going into subcategories. And then what's really interesting is the Cybersecurity Framework then cross-matches those subcategories to other frameworks. That kind of goes into your question in terms of like how they match up. That's what they did. They've actually gone through and said, hey, this control matches up to these controls, which is kind of interesting.
So basically it's a replacement for the cloud security matrix.
It's not meant to be a replacement. They did these crossovers because if you're already using it, then you can kind of match them up and use them in conjunction.
Exactly what the cloud security matrix did before, like, because with each thing it would map to
Right.
like COVID and
Right.
et cetera, where like each one applied to one.
Yeah, so it's not even, you can cross match it, so you don't have to go and toss out what you're using. You can use this in conjunction with what you're using, which I think is good. And then there's the profiles in the tier. That's a little bit tricky. I'll get into that. And this is how it's laid out. You have the 5 functions, and they color code them. Then there's about you divided into categories, which go into subcategories, and they have the information references. This is actually how it's laid out in the document if you take a look at it. And this is actually the 5 functions, and they use these color coding. Great. So got cut off. So it's identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Identify is laying out the groundwork for what we call an information security management system, i.e., and it's you can't see it, but things such as setting down your governance for IT and IT security, doing a risk assessment, understanding what your risks are to your organization, understanding your strategy to how to manage risk, things such as knowing what your assets are, and assets are not just your computers, but also your software and your systems and so forth, and understanding your business environment. So it kind of like lays down how things are, and then it takes the next step is putting in protection methods, access control and training and so forth, and then detect. Well, that's all about monitoring and auditing and know what the heck's going on with your system or who's going to access your system, and then if something does happen, you have response. Whether it's an incident response, whether you have a disaster recovery, you have to respond to it. And then once you've responded, you got to get back and running on your business. That's recovery. What I do like is some interesting elements that aren't always in other frameworks. It's, if you see under response to recovery, you have these ideas of improvements. You have an incident. Did you do a lessons learned? Have you figured out what went wrong or what you can do to improve it, and then go back and improve how you're responding and how you're doing things? A lot of people don't always do that. They don't do that post-mortem review to how they improve things. But the Cybersecurity Framework actually puts it out as very explicit that they want you to be improving things and doing a better job. And I think that to me is real important because as we see things going on as professionals, we see, hey, target got hit. What did they do right or wrong, so that you can do better in your organization? That sort of improvement is really, really critical. So I kind of pulled this example out to kind of help you guys understand what it looks like. So we have access control, which is under protection, and this is what they have in the Cybersecurity Framework. It's access to assets are limited to authorized users, processes, or devices, and to authorize activities and transactions. So that's the function, which is here the protect. The category is access control, and then it breaks it up into 4 subcategories. Number 1 is about identifications and credentials for authorized devices. Number 2 is about physical access. That means things such as, hey, you have it in a secure room, or you've got it in a secure data center. 3 is you have remote access controlled, people dialing into your system. And 4, that you have access permissions that are managed, and you're dealing with least privilege and separation of duties. And that is as far as it goes in the Cybersecurity Framework. It doesn't go any deeper in terms of explanatory information, which I think for some people throws them off because they figure they're going to go into a lot of depth and whatnot. But that's why I like the fact that they do the matching up to other frameworks, because then you can go to those other frameworks and see what they say and what they espouse upon, and that you can actually go deeper. Sorry, there was number 5, which is about network integrity, having segregated networks. This is another example, again taken from the Cybersecurity Framework. This one is from Identify, has asset management. To be honest, there's actually 6 different steps, but this is how they lay it out in the framework, in the document. They talk about the function, and then they have the category, and they have the subcategories, and you see over the end they have the informational references, where they do the actual match up to the specific area in those different frameworks. Realizing that some of the frameworks don't always match up. So you have like ISO 27001, and the front end is almost the same set. It's 711, it's 712, and again 711, 712, and then but only 711 with the third one. So this is how you match up. And the thing is, if your organization is already using ISO 27001 as your standard, you can then match up and know what you're already doing in the Cybersecurity Framework, and then take a look at what is different or unique, because there are some things, like I said, that are different and unique in the Cybersecurity Framework from others. These are the information references. Like I said, there's COBIT 5. There's the critical security controls, or SANS top 20. There's these next two ones, which are more of people who are dealing with SCADA, ISO 27001, and then of course the NIST 853, which is more for federal government. So these are the matchups they do. And now I've also heard of people who have done matchups with PCI DSS, the cybersecurity framework, who have done matches up for HIPAA, the cybersecurity framework, and so forth. I've not seen those, but they're out there. I also have, I think I might have enough for everyone. I also was able to get from SANS, they did this poster last year, which is mainly focused on the critical security controls, but what it also does is also includes the NIST Cybersecurity Framework in a matchup matrix between critical security controls, ISO 27002, PCI, cybersecurity framework. So I'll pass these out toward the end. The next element is the profile, which is it's more used more for when you're implementing the cybersecurity framework. And what it does is it kind of figures out, okay, where do we stand and where do we want to go? So they talk about the current profile, which is, okay, where are you for each of the categories and subcategories? You need to have someone assess it, either yourself or someone else, and say, hey, you're doing really strong with this control and this one not too well, and here's where you stand. And then, again, you have to assess your organization and what is important for you. You then set down the future profile. Where do you want to be for each of those categories? And obviously, there's going to be a difference between where you're at and where you want to be. So you do a gap identification, and now you know what you need to focus on. Because obviously, from that, you would then see what's more important and spend your resources on. And this is kind of how it's done. So you have your current profile, your target. There's going to be some differences in some of them. And in red, well, that's what you need to focus on based upon where you're at, where you want to be. Tiers is a really kind of weird section of it. And I don't know if everyone really fully understands it. I know I don't fully understand it. So I'm not, it's almost like why. And people refer to it as basically a maturity model that's not a maturity model. And I'm not sure how many people know what we mean by a maturity model. I'll talk about that shortly. But I think it's really kind of important. But it's poorly understood. I think a lot of people are like kind of just skimming over this point. They have 4 tiers, and it's partial, risk-informed, repeatable, and adaptive. And they assess these tiers based upon the maturity of the organization in risk management, and the integration of risk management into the organization, and then external participation. That means how the organization is participating with other organizations and so forth in terms of information, passing on information or getting information and so forth. That's become a big thing nowadays is, hey, we need to be sharing information that we see so we can improve security. So what is a maturity model? Again, I don't know how many people have heard the term before or know what it is. But basically it's about a degree of formality or basically how good your processes are in your organization. The idea is if you're what we call an ad hoc, or what I've seen with IT organizations, it's the ones they're in what we call firefighter mode. Doing everything by the seat of the pants. For instance, if you're building systems, you build systems ad hoc and just kind of like do it differently so every system is not quite the same, and then when you go try to do any support work, it's a pain in the butt because they're all different? Or do you have a clearly documented and followed procedure to build every system that's repeatable, so every system is the same, and then when it comes time to support them, instead of having a dozen or 2 dozen or several hundred systems that are all not quite the same, you got all these systems that are the same, that are all managed, you can easily do it. That's the difference between having an ad hoc, low maturity or no maturity versus a very mature organization. And that can be really, really important because, I know from my experience is that if you're, in an immature organization, it can be very costly for your company, or the company's going to get really tired of your organization and might get rid of you and outsource you because you're not doing the job that you're supposed to be doing. Some maturity models can be what we call process-oriented, and some are what would we call a people, process, technology-oriented. One that you may or may not have heard of is called CMM, Capability Maturity Model, which was originally created for software, but then was started using for other areas. And that's what I'm familiar with, personally, because I was involved with an organization that had to be CMM assessed. There are others out there. You may have heard these terms. You've heard the Nolan model or stated of growth model, which is more people, process, technology oriented. Which I think for IT security, I think that's a better way of doing it. And Cybersecurity Framework seems to be more people, process, technology oriented in terms of their maturity. This is CMM for those who've not seen it before. It's a 5-stage level, and the idea being is that you start at level 1, which is your ad hoc initial, but if you want to get to level 2, you know, there's all different things that you need to do. You need to do requirements management, project planning, and so forth. You need to be doing all those processes well before you can go to stage 2. If you want to go to stage 3, you need to be doing everything at level 2 and at everything at level 3, and then so forth, with the ultimate goal is try to get yourself to level 5, which is really, really, really difficult. I know we got to level 3, and it was, for us, it was a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money to get to level 3. But it was worth it because we didn't get outsourced like other IT groups in our company. This is the other type, which basically it has different columns here for like policy and formation and so forth, and then to be assessed at different levels, it's depending on how well you're doing these different activities as you move across. What is kind of interesting is that in a CMM type model, the goal is always to get to the top level. Whereas in the CSF model and the other one, well, that's not necessarily the goal. What I think is better. Partial would be like your ad hoc, where risk informed, you have a better understanding of what's going on, you have things under, a little bit better under control, and then you keep improving yourself for repeatable and adaptive. And this is what's kind of neat about the tiers, I think, is that they do encourage you, if you're at tier 1, to get to tier 2. But here's what I find is interesting is that going to a higher level isn't something that you have to do. It depends on your organization, because it becomes costly in time and money to go to 3, to go to 4, and maybe for your organization it's not worth it. So maybe staying at 2 is where you need to be. So unlike with CMM, where the ultimate goal for almost everyone who does CMM is like, hey, we gotta get to 5. That's the big goal. In the cybersecurity framework, getting to 4 isn't the big goal. And this is what I thought was kind of interesting, is that they say that getting to your target profile, i.e. getting to where you want to be for all the different categories and subcategories, is more important than getting to a higher tier level. So again, I mean, the tiers is kind of, to me, is kind of a strange part of the cybersecurity framework. I don't know if it's everyone fully understands it, because there's not a whole lot of information in even the document. So.
Do they have anything guiding you on your target profile, like your company's risk tolerance or exposure factor?
Well, that's how the thing is. It's all based upon your risk tolerance and your risk exposure. Is you kind of had to set it down yourself. And that is kind of a frustration when you look at it, because, I mean, it's not a really freaking big document. They don't give you a whole lot of guidance. I think they're trying to it's kind of a balance between, do we tell you exactly what to do and then kind of restrict your decisions, or we make it high level enough that everyone's kind of free to come up to what's best for you. It's kind of a balancing act, and maybe in future versions they'll do it better, or maybe people will come out with like some guidance and some suggestions and so forth. Because again, the old thing is like, your organization, you have your own issues in terms of what's important to you, your organization, and what the risks are, whereas another organization deals with different risks. And so by understanding what is that effect, and a lot of organizations do a poor job at that then drives what is important in terms of where you need to focus your activities. I mean, I think they're trying to be, I said, they're not trying to be a one-size-fit-all. They're trying to make it flexible enough, to fit different organizations. But it's one of the things where, like, is it too loose or
Still very
too tight?
strict.
Yeah. So it's, and I think one thing also, I think what's going to happen is you might see people where they're going to come out with like, sort of like, hey, if you're in the financial industry, here's maybe a suggested, profile for you if you're in the financial world. Oh, hey, you're in manufacturing. This may be what you need to look at. Oh, you're in healthcare. Maybe this is what you need, or something like that. And I think that's something I've been hearing that we may see that where people are, as they start working with it and coming up with some, like, hey, if you will, samples and guidance and whatnot, that might, help other organizations.
So have you heard of the DoD Risk Management Framework based on the 853 R4?
A little bit, but I'm not.
So they have private, like there's a privacy overlay, there's a simulation system.
Yeah.
It's kind of getting at.
And you see kind of that crossover and whatnot. Even DHS has something I'll mention about this that's done kind of a supports to they kind of got mapping over some of their stuff into cybersecurity framework. So I think we're going to see more and more of that stuff. It's in some ways it's not there yet, but I think we'll see something in like the next year or two. As more and more organizations use it, and more, especially as more organizations are starting to push it, they need to have bringing support. And it's not quite there, but I think it's coming. This is actually something from the cybersecurity framework, how they implement it, and they're big about okay, you want to prioritize and scope it. You want to create your current profile, i.e., where you're currently at, and how you meet, the framework. And again, this is why I kind of like the matchups with the other framework. So if you're like an ISO 27001 and 2 organization, and you've already been assessed against that, and it's sort of like, okay, what matches up? Oh, yeah, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. Oh, here's some things that we're not doing. Is that important for us? You want to conduct your risk assessment, i.e., understand what are the risks that face your organization, that then drives where you need to be, and then once you have that, you analyze and prioritize the gaps, and you implement it. And they also have this chart from the Cybersecurity Framework booklet, where it's a big thing about ongoing improvement. This is really important. There always is ongoing improvement, and everyone needs to be involved with it. I think for a lot of us, we're probably down here at implementation. Some of us may be more here, but it has to be from everyone. It has to come from the senior level. Say we're going to do this. The business level need to have an input as well, and if we're down here, then we need to be involved as well. And everyone has to be in this whole process of ongoing improvements and so forth. And that's a real difficult thing for a lot of organizations. Who, if you will, are not really mature in terms of how they are handling their security. I said I do assessment with organizations. I go in there, and one first thing I say, like, hey, let's see your policies and procedures. We don't have those. Okay, so it's like starting at step one. So some of the resources out there, I think more are coming. Again, it's only been out a little over a year, so it's kind of interesting that we have some stuff, but there's a lot of things that isn't there, and I'm not really sure if we're going to see some of these things, but it might be a while. So for training, there is no official training on this. I don't think there ever will be. The only training I have found is that ISACA has I think it's a 2-day course on cybersecurity framework, of course, because they're behind COVID-5. It's all COVID-5 oriented. So this is the only one. You get a certificate when you complete it and take an exam. That's not a certification. That's just a certificate of completion. One thing's kind of interesting, I'm not sure if we haven't seen this, is ISACA, if you're not aware, is doing a cybersecurity conference in DC in October. And I went and looked at the preliminary information they have, and they talk about how, we're going to have these tracks, and guess what they call the tracks? Oh, there's going to be an identity track, and a protect track, and a detect track. And I'm like thinking, yeah, where did you get those terms from? So it's going to be interesting when we see the list of the workshops or the presentations at their conference to see how oriented it is to cybersecurity framework. But ISACA seems to be the only group that seems to be kind of behind one of them kind of getting behind it in terms of pushing it. Certifications, no, there's no certifications, whether it's good or bad. Other frameworks do have those. I mean, with COBIT, with ITIL, with ISO 27001 and 2, you can get certifications. You can be certified in terms of base knowledge. You can be certified as an implementer of it. You can be certified in assessing it. Nothing for cybersecurity framework, and I don't expect that to change because it would probably have to come from with NIST approval. Yes.
Maybe I'm stepping a little out of space here because I'm a little confused. How is this different than risk management framework and NIST 800 series certification? Are you talking about the exact same thing?
No. Totally different.
It is totally different.
Yeah, the cyber, you got to separate the cyber, this cybersecurity framework from the various book, items in the 800 series. They're totally separate. This is meant to be an overall, all-encompassing cybersecurity framework. In the 800 series, the only one that's a close match is 853, but that's only focused on the federal government and doesn't have a total matchup.
Because ISC Square does have a certification for risk management framework. It's the CAP certification.
Yeah, but that's again, I think it's more tied to NIST, the NIST 800 special publication, which is for federal government. Whereas the cybersecurity framework is very, very new, and it's also meant to be for everyone, not just federal government. It's for private industry and everyone else. So I know a lot of people do kind of get confused, especially when they're kind of familiar with the 800 series about like, oh, well, isn't that the same? And it's not really. I mean, there is some matchups to it, but it's focused on a different area. Well, actually, I would say that the cybersecurity framework is actually meant to be a broader focus, and because it's so broad, it can't be as real specific versus the other one, which is more federal government computing. In terms of books and resources, at this point, there's not a whole lot either. You can get the framework itself from NIST. It's a PDF. Go to the website. They have actually a section on their webpage for it, and they have some other documents that you can download or other things that work with it. The other group that has actually written a book on it is ISACA, and it's implementing the cybersecurity framework using COVID 5. Big surprise there. If you're a member, you get that for free. If you're not, it's going to cost you quite a bit. I think if I wanted to get the print version as a member, it's going to cost me $35. If you're not a member, I think it's like $80. But there's nothing else. I've gone to Amazon and searched on cybersecurity framework. No one else has written any books. I don't know if we're going to see one. There are some other items out there as far as they're free. Intel has written a white paper on a use case of it. You can download it for free. PricewaterhouseCoopers has created a white paper on how to adopt the cybersecurity framework. Like I said, NIST has a resource page tied to it, which they're putting some stuff there. Department of Homeland Security has what they call the C3 site. So it has resources there, and I'm hoping that we'll see more and more of these resources popping up. But hey, like I said, it's only been a little over a year, so we'll see as we get more and more stuff out there. Version 2.0, I don't know. I will point out that with ISO 27001, it took about 5 years between versions. Like I said, we've only had it out for a year, so I'm not, I don't expect this version 2 for another 4 or 5 years. I think more people need to use it, beat it up, see what works, what doesn't work, and we'll see where that goes. These are kind of my conclusions. I really think we'll see more and more people using it. More and more organizations using it. What I do like, especially since they do the matchups, is that people don't have to see it as an either-or proposition. They don't have to, if they're already using COVID, if they're already using ISO 27001, they can use the cybersecurity framework along with it. One of our clients, that was the case. They're a financial organization. They already had built their information security infrastructure around ISO 27001. And they came to us because they're a financial institution. The SEC comes along and says, you need to be assessed against the cybersecurity framework. So for us, we just did the matchups. Okay, you're doing ISO 27001. Okay, it matches up to these items in the cybersecurity framework. How well you're doing it, and the few ones that don't match up, because there are some that don't. We assess them and say, hey, how are you doing on this one? How are you doing on that point? And so it wasn't they had to go and throw out what they had done. It was just kind of like, we'll layer it on top or add to what you're already doing. So it was really easy. I do think we're going to see an increase in organizations using it, especially with various other large companies now telling their vendors, their suppliers, however you want to call it. I said this financial institution, they actually are a vendor to Bank of America. Bank of America haven't yet come to them and said, hey, we want you to do this also, but that could happen. So you could be in an organization where you're not using it now, but maybe in 6 months or a year, you're going to be expected to put it to use in some manner. Now, depending on your industry. Like I said, I'm seeing a lot in the financial industry. Other areas, I don't know. I think with healthcare, everyone's running around and worrying about HIPAA, so I don't really expect to see it there. But I think the ones that are more heavily regulated, whether it's a PCI or from the government, are more likely to use it. If you don't follow in that area, maybe a little bit farther down the road before you're going to have to worry about it. So, any questions? Like I said, I have a few of these handouts here. I put it from SANS, and what I like, it has a poster on it. You can get this as a PDF, but I asked SANS to send me a whole bunch of these because I want to be able to pass them out to you guys. I don't know if I have enough for everyone, but take one, pass it back. And if you don't really need it, pass it on to someone who can use it. You can get it from as a PDF, but I think it's a really good tool and whatnot. So, any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
What's the publication for cybersecurity framework?
It's called implementing the cybersecurity framework. It's that's the actual official name. If you search on the NIST CSF, it'll take you to the NIST website, and you can download it as a PDF. It's separate from the 800 series, totally. So it's a totally separate page on this NIST Cybersecurity Framework, and you can go and get the PDF there. I think there's like 2 or 3 other documents. I think there's like an Excel spreadsheet that you can it'll help you out with some stuff. But if you look on the back of the poster, there's the whole listing of the matchup of ISO with PCI with critical security with cybersecurity framework. So that's what I find that's why I like that poster.
Were there any lectures left?
I passed out all the ones I had. You can also get that as a PDF from their website.
Thanks, Jim.
I actually asked SANS to send me a whole bunch, so you can probably drop them and ask them. Yes. If you're not on the SANS mailing list, you can drop them an email. Maybe they'll send you a hard copy, but you can get it as a PDF from their website. There's actually a poster that you can get, and I was able to get them to send me some for this session. Okay, thank you.